Well, good morning. It is good to be with you all this morning. I am John the Baptist, and I am the associate pastor here at St. Andrew's United Methodist Church. And I just wanted to start out by letting you know last week was an incredibly powerful week. It was also a heavy week. And this week is not going to be quite as heavy. And I only tell you that, I only front load that in the sermon to let you know because I'm starting out by talking about a kid being in the hospital. And it turns out okay. So a couple of years ago, one of my kids was riding a bike and they were at a skate park and ended up having a pretty bad fall and getting a concussion. It was not a good situation for a good half hour. We were pretty nervous, pretty scared, and kids started getting really sleepy, and we thought maybe they were going to fall asleep. And when I was a kid, I had had a concussion as well when I was about the same age. And the one thing that I knew is that you are not supposed to fall asleep. Do not let the kid fall asleep. And so we ended up getting them to the emergency room at Children's and walked in to see the doctor. And she was considerably younger than me, which I've noticed happens sort of increasingly as I go along. But it's still kind of a new thing for the doctor to be that much younger than me. And so I asked her about it. I said, listen, we've been trying to keep this kid awake for the last, hour and a half because we've heard that that's a significant part of healing. And the doctor said, oh, yeah, no, I know. Back in the olden days, they used to ask. And I thought, well, that's rude. You may know what you're talking about medically speaking, but your bedside manner, not my favorite. So I did have a picture of me when I was in the hospital. Just to give context, apparently. When we read stories in the Bible about illness and health, about mental and emotional issues, and about healing, often they just seem out of date. The way that they talk about healing may sound like the olden days. How we understand illness and wellness, how we understand health and healing has changed a lot since then. And there is so much that is just weird about the story that we're going to talk about this morning. And so I want you to keep an open mind just for a few minutes as we think about how healing happens today. What we mean when we talk about healing. I think it's not as different often as we might imagine. And I think there are some things that we can learn about how Jesus dealt with people going through significant difficulties. We're going to be in Mark chapter 8 this morning. Mark chapter 8, starting with verse 22. They came to Bethsaida. Some people brought a blind man to Jesus and begged him to touch him. Jesus took the blind man by the hand and led him out of the village. And when he had put saliva on his eyes and laid his hands on him, he asked, "Can you see anything?" And the man looked up and said, "I can see people, but they look like trees walking." Then Jesus laid his hands on his eyes again, and he looked intently, and his sight was restored, and he saw everything clearly. Then Jesus sent him away to his home, saying, "Do not even go into the village." May God bless the reading and hearing of just a portion of God's words. There's a few things I want you to notice about how this story begins. And the first is that people brought this man to Jesus and begged Jesus to help him. For whatever reason, this man was not willing or able to bring himself to Jesus. Now, when we think about people who are dealing with significant challenges in our time, we may think about provisions that are made in our time for people who are undergoing significant difficulty. When we think about persons who have trouble seeing. We think about the bumps on the sidewalk to make sure that people can tell where the street begins. We think about Braille on elevators and Braille on McDonald's drive-thrus, which I have other questions about. But there are provisions we are used to seeing made for people who have difficulty of this kind. In the first century, they didn't have any of that. The provision that was made for people who were not able to see was that they could go out to the gate of a village or to the main street in the village, and they could beg for alms. They could ask for people to give them money or food so that they had what they needed to be able to take care of themselves. In the first century, this man was completely dependent upon his community for his well-being. And so his community brought him. The text doesn't say exactly who it was that brought the man to Jesus, whether it was his friends, whether it was neighbors, members of his family, just concerned members of the community, but someone brought this man to Jesus because presumably they knew it was beyond them. They wanted to help. They wanted this man to be well. They wanted this man to be able to have what he needed to be okay, but they knew that it was more than they were able to provide. It was beyond their ability to help. And this is often a struggle. So often we see people in difficulty, we see people in pain, and we want so badly to be able to help. We would do anything to help this person. And often there's just nothing we individually can do. And so what do we do? How do we react when there is nothing that we personally can do, when it's completely beyond us? I know many of you, like me, have been following along with the news the last week or so, all the violence and the continued threats of violence. And it is difficult. It is painful for me to watch because it is dealing with some of the thorniest, most difficult moral questions of our time and really the last 100 years. And good and faithful people are coming to very different conclusions about the best way to move forward, about the best way to deal with this awful, horrifying situation. In fact, this past week, just by way of illustration, I saw an argument on Facebook between two guys who seemed like good and faithful followers of Jesus, and I found out later that they are actually both seminary faculty members at the same seminary, from the same denomination, and even from the same wing of the denomination, and they were having a public argument on Facebook because they both believed that they had the right answer. And not only did they believe they had the right answer, they believed that it was self-evident. They were in essence shouting at one another, "Don't you see? Don't you see?" There are often times when we as individuals are out beyond our ability to help, out beyond our ability to do something for individual people. And that is sometimes difficult for us to come to grips with. When I was a kid, my dad had a copy of the Serenity Prayer on his desk at work. He was the elementary school principal at the school I went to. He followed me around wherever I went. And I never got sent to his office because I knew better, but I did spend time in his office, and at one point, we got into a little bit of an argument. Now, I feel like my honesty compels me to tell you that the historicity of this incident has been, in fact, disputed by the other party present. But I remember this argument that I had with my dad. We got into this discussion about a really difficult moral problem, and I wondered why we as Christians were not doing something to solve, to fix this problem. And he gestured toward the prayer. And there's I think, did we already see a picture? A copy of this prayer. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Many of you are familiar with this prayer. And he brought up this prayer and said, there are some things, John, that you cannot change. And you need to accept that. And I was irate. I hated that prayer. I thought it was defeatist. What do you mean there are things I cannot change? What do you mean there are things that I cannot do something about? If I choose to change something, I can change something, said the 5th grader to the school principal. But I found out it's true. There are some things I cannot do anything about. And there is this group of people around this man dealing with this significant issue. And they brought him to Jesus. They said, we've done what we know how to do. We have helped him every way that we can. Jesus, can you do something for this man? And so then Jesus started a healing process with this man. And first, Jesus took him out of the village. For whatever reason, this man could not be helped where he was. It could be that his environment was not conducive to his healing. It could have been that Jesus needed, for some reason, the healing to be hidden. There were a lot of times that you'll find Jesus telling people, don't tell anyone what I just did for you. It's what scholars call the messianic secret. That Jesus was saying, once everybody knows who I am and what I'm here to do, it's going to become very dangerous for me. And so he would help someone, but he would say, don't tell anyone. And it could have been that for whatever reason, the people around the man would have made healing difficult or impossible. And so for Jesus to begin healing for this man, Jesus took him out of town. And then what did Jesus do? Jesus spit in his eyes. It's unfortunate, but it's there in the Bible. What are you going to do? Now, of course, this sounds gross to most of us. If it were between us having some kind of difficult disease and having another human spit in our eye, it may be a toss-up what we would do to have it fixed. But in fact, this was a traditional medical practice at the time. Saliva, unfortunately, was traditionally believed to have healing properties. So you see Jesus at other times where he would spit in the mud and use the mud to rub on someone's eyes. And you see other ancient sources talking about saliva being used for healing as well. This was not something that was just a weird and bizarre thing. It was, in fact, an accepted medical practice of the time. We tend to think of healing in the Bible as often something completely miraculous, something entirely outside of medicine and science. And whether we believe that something outside of medicine and science is possible or not, we might unconsciously try to approach the story that way. But this is apparently not that kind of story. What happened to the man's eyes was surprising and it was unexpected, but Jesus was in fact using methods of healing that would have been known to the people around him at the time. They wouldn't have been surprised. They would have seen this as the kind of thing that was done for the kind of problem that the man had. Just like LASIK surgery now, the results can be miraculous, but not entirely outside the bounds of medicine and in science, but instead informed by them. And so the healing process that Jesus was taking this man through involved him taking the man out of town, putting saliva on his eyes, and then touching the man with his hands. And this healing then came in stages and not all at once. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't like things that take time. I want instant. I want now. I want microwaves and not crock pots. I want an Instapot and not boiling rice. I want to stream movies rather than to wait until it comes out on Wide World of Disney and pop in a VHS and record it on Sunday afternoons. I want to be able to do things now. You forget I'm from the olden days, back when we did that. But things that are worthwhile always take time. You want to get in the best shape that you've ever been in. It doesn't happen overnight. It takes time. You want to raise kids to be good human beings. It doesn't happen overnight. It takes time. You want to be in relationships that are worth having. It does not happen overnight. It takes time. And even Jesus healing this man took time. And we know it took some time at least because there's this weird story in the middle about how the first time that Jesus touched this man's eyes, they were not completely healed. At first, the man didn't see clearly. He said he saw people, but they looked like trees walking around. I think we have an artist rendering of what he saw in the first place. He wasn't healed immediately. When Jesus touched the man a second time, then he saw clearly. There was a process that this guy went through. Even a miracle that Jesus did, a miracle of healing, involved Jesus taking this man out of the village, rubbing saliva on his eyes, touching his eyes, and then touching his eyes again. There was a process, and it took time. And then the man was restored to his home. Now, notice that returning home was not after this man's healing, but it was a part of his healing. Returning to his home was not the thing he did after everything was okay. It was a part of him being made okay in the first place. This man had been isolated. He had been unable to participate in any meaningful way in the life of his community for goodness knows how long. And most likely, he had been stigmatized. People had very specific ideas about why certain people couldn't see. You see this in other places when there is a man born blind. And what do the religious leaders ask Jesus? They say, who sinned? Whose fault is it that this man was born blind? Was it this man or was it his parents? The assumption is that this illness, this thing that this man was going through, had a moral component to it, and even a retributive purpose, that God was punishing someone by this man's blindness. God was doing something to someone because of what he had done. And Jesus is absolutely flipping that assumption on its head. And so he sends the man home. This return to the man's home was an essential part of his restoration. Returning to his home, not to his village, not to tell everyone, but to the people who had brought him to Jesus in the first place. Now again, this is kind of a weird story, and anytime we use the word healing, a lot of us get a little squeamish. But this is often what restoration looks like for us as well. We are restored, first of all, by our community. Sometimes we're not able to get the help that we need on our own. We are past the end of our own resources. We're past the end of our own ability to cope, past the end of our own ability to deal, past the end of our own ability to move forward on our own. And our community comes around us and helps us to find what we need. They often can see what we cannot in our own life. And then we too enter a healing process. We want our restoration, we want our healing, we want our life change to be something that happens like that, instantaneously, immediately. But we don't get that. Most often, we get therapy, we get doctors, we get meds, we get tools to be able to help us. And after we've gone through this healing process, the last part of it is being restored to our community, being able to return to the kinds of relationships that we want to have with our loved ones, with the community who was there for us when we needed them most. And so my invitation to you, first of all, today is to recognize your community. Now, for many of you, it is the people sitting around you here, the people that you're going to talk to once you get out into the rotunda on the way out. It's going to be the people you meet immediately afterwards for Bible study downstairs. It's going to be the people you meet with on Sunday night and Wednesday night. For many people, your community is here. And if you haven't found that community yet, we invite you to get plugged in. Find ways to be in deeper relationship with those around you. You can go to our group finder at sa.church. We're going to have an event here on the 22nd, Sunday evening at 6 o'clock, talking about mental wellness. There are a ton of ways that you can find people to be your community. And then get the support you need. Maybe things are going well for you right now. Maybe you are just killing it, and that's great. But maybe there are some things that you're struggling with, ways that you wish you didn't have to walk through this world, things that you wish you did not have to bear alone. I invite you, find the kinds of support that you need to be able to deal with whatever it is that you're dealing with. And then come back to be that community for others. Because it is each of our responsibility to help carry the heavy weight that the people around us are carrying. None of us can fix every problem that we have. None of us can go through every challenge on our own. It is our responsibility to be the community for others, so that when they need someone, we can be there for them. And then when we have need, they too can be there for us. One of the ministries we support here at St. Andrews is Sienna Francis House. And Jennifer, our missions director, and I recently toured Sienna Francis House. And they have there a number of support programs for people who are experiencing homelessness. And we have an image here of a lot of empty beds. This is what it looks like kind of on the inside of Sienna Francis House. They have space for people who are dealing with addiction and people who are dealing with substance abuse, people who will not have a bed to sleep in that night or a roof over their head unless they are here. And all of these things seem like such a huge problem. What could I, as an individual, possibly do to bear these burdens? What could I possibly do that will make any kind of difference for this huge number of people? I can't give everyone a home. I can't give everyone food. I can't give everyone they need the medical and mental and emotional health support that they need. But there are organizations like Sienna Francis House that are doing some of this good work. And one of the most fascinating things that I heard while we were there on the tour is that a significant percentage of the staff were previously residents. These were a group of people who had been helped and supported by this community when they were at the lowest point in their lives, when they were going through the most difficult thing that they had ever been through. They were on their worst and hardest day, in their lowest moment. And then rather than, after they had been helped, rather than running away, rather than putting this difficult space in their rearview mirror as quickly as they could and never looking back, a significant number of people returned to this community in order to help others, in order to be this community for others. They were helped. They were supported by this community. They were restored by this community. And it was so significant to them, that healing, that help, that support, that they returned to it to be the community for those who needed it. Would you all join me in prayer? Good and gracious God, we thank you for this day. We thank you for all of the good gifts that you have given us. And God, we thank you for this community. We thank you for the support of those around us. And God, for everyone within the sound of my voice today who does not feel, who does not experience, who does not have that community, I ask that they would be given the courage and the opportunity to get plugged in to a community somewhere with someone who would be able to be a community for them when they need it. God, and I ask that we would be that community for those around us. Give us courage, give us wisdom, and give us your Spirit so that we might bring transformation into this world through you and through your Spirit. God, we love you and we trust you, and we ask all these things in Jesus' name. Amen.